When I stood up in the middle of the crowded dining room, the soft glow of candles bouncing off the polished silverware, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, not out of fear, but out of excitement, the kind of joy that only comes once in a lifetime. 20 family members were seated around the long oak table, my father at one end, my mother at the other, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone chatting and laughing, unaware that I was about to deliver news that would change everything. My husband David gently squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes urging me on. I tapped my glass lightly, and as the sound rang through the room, conversations died down and all eyes turned toward me. With a wide smile, I said the words I had been waiting months to say: I am pregnant. At first, there was silence, the brief, stunned kind of silence that comes before an explosion, and then the room erupted. Cheers! Applause. Hands clapping against the table. Relatives shouting, "Congratulations!" My grandmother crying into her napkin, my father standing up to hug me, my mother covering her mouth with her hands in apparent shock before rushing to squeeze me in her arms. For a moment, it felt like pure heaven, like my entire life had led to this instant finally celebrated, finally recognized, finally basking in unconditional love. But I knew that heaven in this family never lasted longer than a few seconds because across the table, sitting with her fork still in her hand, Melissa's smile froze. I watched her face change in slow motion, the curve of her lips faltering, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly, her fingers twitching like she had just remembered the script she had rehearsed in the mirror. And then, right on cue, she dropped her fork, the clatter against the plate, slicing through the joyful noise. Everyone turned toward her just as she clutched her stomach, her right hand pressing against her side, her eyes rolling back as she let out a low moan. But this time, she didn't just collapse. As she stumbled forward, she grabbed my arm violently, nails digging into my skin, knocking my wine glass to the floor where it shattered into jagged pieces. Crimson liquid splattering across the tablecloth like blood. Gasps tore through the room. Mom shrieked, "Melissa, my baby, what is it? What hurts? Tell me!" Chairs scraped back as uncles and cousins jumped to their feet, some rushing to her side, others looking around in panic. Melissa slid down from her chair to the floor, curling onto her side, breathing heavily like she was about to faint. She whimpered through clenched teeth. "It's my stomach, Mom. The pain. It's so strong. I can't. Tears appeared like magic in her eyes, sparkling in the candlelight. My mother was already kneeling beside her, stroking her hair, shouting for someone to bring water, for someone to call the hospital. My father had grabbed his keys ready to drive. And then the knife twisted deeper. My mother turned her tear-streaked face toward me, her voice sharp, accusing, cruel. "Look what you've done, Clara," she cried. "You dropped this shocking news, and now your sister is dying in front of us. Are you satisfied now?" My heart clenched, but not from guilt. I had lived this scene too many times, my joy stolen, my name dragged through the mud, my mother weaponizing her panic against me. But this time, I wasn't the weak one. This time, I wasn't defenseless. I stood still while chaos raged around me. My hands folded calmly over my belly, and for a moment, no one noticed that I wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, wasn't trembling. I could already see the pattern repeating, Melissa moaning, the family abandoning me another night in the hospital where doctors would find nothing wrong. But what no one here knew was that I had been waiting for this exact moment, planning for it, hungering for it. I reached slowly into my purse, pulled out my phone, and unlocked it with deliberate calm. My voice cut through the storm of noise, firm measured, sharp enough to silence the room. "Wait." Everyone froze, their worried faces turning toward me in confusion. My mother clutching Melissa's trembling body on the floor. "Wait before we run to the hospital again. There's something you all need to see." The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by Melissa's labored breathing and the steady tick of the wall clock. I looked directly at her, and in that instant I caught it, the flicker in her eyes, the tiniest flash of panic breaking through the mask of pain. For the first time, she realized the script might fail. And for the first time, I felt no guilt. I felt power. When people look at my sister Melissa, they see a fragile porcelain doll who survived the impossible. The miracle baby born 2 months too soon. her tiny body blue and trembling, hooked up to machines that beeped through endless nights. They see the story my mother Helen has told for years, the story of a child who almost died and therefore must be cherished, protected, placed above everyone else. What they don't see is what I see, what I've lived with for decades, the manipulation that grew from that protection, the cruelty hidden behind the trembling lips and teary eyes, the monster that learned early that sickness could control a room. I was 10 when Melissa came home from the hospital for good. Her lungs stronger, her body no longer weak, but my life was already altered. Playdates canceled soccer practice, skipped sleepovers, denied all because Mom would say, "Clara, you must understand Melissa needs you more. She's delicate. You're strong." Strong, she would say, as if it were a compliment, but it felt like a sentence. Strong meant invisible. Strong meant I didn't get comfort, didn't get fairness. Strong meant every time I wanted to shine, I was told to dim my light for Melissa's sake. At first, I accepted it. I would sit beside Melissa's bed reading her stories. I would bring her juice. I would hold her hand when she cried. I believed it was my duty, but over time, something shifted. Melissa grew healthy, robust, even yet the performance of weakness lingered. A headache here, a stomach ache there, always at the perfect moment. If I had a friend over, she would suddenly need Mom's attention. If I came home with an award, she would clutch her side and moan until everyone was circling her instead of congratulating me. At 12, I noticed her smirking once when she thought no one could see. That smirk has haunted me ever since. Quietly, I began to test what would happen if I ignored her performance. If she moaned from the couch, I stayed in my room. If she cried about her stomach, I continued reading my book. Every time Mom stormed into my room shouting, "Clara, how can you be so heartless? Look at your sister. She's suffering and you're doing nothing." I would press my lips together, swallowing the words, knowing they wouldn't matter. That was my first lesson in quiet strength silence. Not the silence of weakness, but the silence of survival. The silence that says, "I will not give you my tears because that is what you feed on." Over the years, Melissa's theatrics grew more sophisticated. At 16, when I made varsity soccer, she collapsed in the bleachers, forcing my parents to leave my first game. At 18, when I gave my valedictorian speech, she fainted in the middle of the auditorium, stealing every eye just as I was about to finish. The applause I should have had was replaced by the chaos of EMTs. My mother wrapped her arms around Melissa, whispering, "You're so brave, my darling," while my diploma felt like ashes in my hands. The worst came when it reached into my relationships. My first boyfriend broke up with me after Melissa fabricated messages pretending I called her a fraud, wishing she would just die. He showed me the screenshots and said I can't be with someone so cruel. Melissa sent me a selfie later that night, wearing the hoodie he had given me, her lips curved in triumph. I remember sitting in the dark, the fabric of my bedsheets twisted in my fists, my jaw clenched, but my voice steady when I whispered to myself, "Not forever. One day she'll trip." That whisper was my second lesson in quiet power patience. Not screaming, not fighting, but waiting, watching, storing every injustice like stones in a wall I was building for the day I'd need to stand firm. My 20s were filled with that waiting. I worked, I studied, I built a life inch by inch while Melissa perfected her act. Always the right side, always the same tears, always calling for Mom first, always rating her pain 8 or 9. To outsiders, it looked like fate had been cruel to her, but to me, it looked like a theater script repeated too many times. I would sip my coffee slowly nodding at her cries, but inside, I was cataloging every detail. And sometimes I caught her reflection in a mirror rehearsing faces, and I would simply watch in silence, not confronting, not exposing, just letting the image burn itself into my memory. Because I knew, and my quiet knowing was more powerful than any scream. David came into my life when I was 28. He was kind, steady, the kind of man who notices small things. He saw how my mother dismissed me, how Melissa conveniently fell ill whenever we had plans, how I forced smiles through ruined dinners. One night he asked me, "Why do you let them?" And I remember answering with the calm I had perfected, "Because I'm not ready yet." That was my third lesson in quiet power strategy. Don't fight battles you can't win. Wait until you have the ground beneath you, until you have evidence, until the trap is set. My mother thought she was protecting Melissa all these years, but what she didn't realize was that she was also training me. Training me to observe, to endure, to stand still when chaos exploded, to let silence sharpen me into something unbreakable. And as the years passed, as the bruises of Melissa's manipulations piled up, I understood that one day the silence would break. One day my patience would end. And when it did, it wouldn't be with shouting or pleading. It would be with proof so sharp no one could deny it. Quiet power is underestimated. People think strength is loud, dramatic, visible. But I had learned that the quiet action of stepping back, of folding your hands instead of flailing, of watching when they think you're blind, that is the strength that terrifies manipulators the most. And it was that strength honed for decades that I carried into the night of my pregnancy announcement. The night when Melissa thought she would steal the moment once again, but I was ready, phone in hand, patience finally over silence, finally broken. By the time I was in my 20s, Melissa's talent for destruction had become as predictable as clockwork, yet every time it happened, the sting felt fresh, raw, unbearable. When I landed an internship at a major firm, a moment I had worked years, for Melissa interrupted my celebration dinner by clutching her chest and sliding to the floor. My mother screamed for help. My father rushed to get the car, and within minutes, the focus of the night shifted from my achievement to Melissa's supposed heart attack. At the hospital, after endless tests that showed nothing, the doctor gently suggested stress, perhaps indigestion. But my mother refused to hear it, insisting on more scans, more pills, more sympathy. Meanwhile, I sat in the corner of the sterile waiting room, my acceptance letter folded neatly in my purse, ignored, forgotten. I wanted to cry, but instead I crossed my arms, leaned back in the chair, and said nothing. Silence again. That night, Melissa caught my eye as she lay on the hospital bed with wires stuck to her chest. When no one else was looking, she smiled. Not the smile of a patient relieved by care, but the smile of a thief who had succeeded. Later, when David proposed to me, slipping the ring on my finger beneath the city lights, Melissa staged her masterpiece. At the engagement party, she slipped into the bathroom and downed a handful of vitamins she had ground up into powder to mimic pills, then staggered back into the room, pale and weak, claiming she had accidentally taken too much of her medication. Guests panicked, the ambulance came, and once again, Melissa was the fragile flower at the center, while my ring might as well have been invisible. My mother even turned on me that night, hissing, "Clara, you should have been watching her. She's your sister." And I simply looked at her, my face calm, though my stomach twisted, and said I didn't know she needed a babysitter. That was a rare slip of defiance, and I was punished with days of icy silence. But even in that silence, I found strength because David heard it. He squeezed my hand after and whispered, "Finally." By then, the pattern was unbearable. Every holiday, every milestone, every fragile moment of happiness, Melissa found a way to poison it. When I was promoted at work, she fainted in the kitchen, sending a pot crashing to the ground. When I hosted Thanksgiving, she clutched her head and wailed until every guest abandoned the table to hover over her. I began to feel cursed, like every step forward in my life carried the guarantee of Melissa dragging me 2 steps back. But here is where the escalation shifted from mere attention-seeking to something darker, more violent. One evening, I was walking down the stairs carrying a tray of laundry. Melissa brushed past me too quickly, her shoulder slamming into mine. I stumbled, the basket flying, my foot slipping on the edge of the carpet. For a terrifying second, I thought I would tumble down the entire flight, but I caught the railing in time. When I looked back at her expecting an apology, she only smirked and whispered, "Careful, Clara. Mom would be devastated if anything happened to you." That was the moment I realized she wasn't just stealing attention anymore. She was testing how far she could push, how much she could damage me before anyone suspected. And even then, my mother defended her. "She didn't mean it, Clara. Don't exaggerate. You always make Melissa look worse than she is." Gaslighting over and over until I questioned whether I was the insane one. Another night, Melissa cornered me in the kitchen, shoving me against the fridge, hissing, "Do you think you'll ever be more loved than me? You'll never win, Clara. Never." Her nails left small half-moons in my arm. I said nothing. I straightened my sleeve to cover the marks and returned to the table with a neutral expression. That was my quiet power again, the refusal to give her the reaction she craved. But inside, a storm brewed. I kept adding stones to my wall, cataloging recording saving. Each injury, each humiliation, each twisted manipulation became another layer. And slowly David began to understand. When Melissa sent him messages from a fake account pretending to be me accusing him of cheating, I showed him the timestamps at the strange details that didn't match. For a while, he wavered, torn by Melissa's skillful lies. But then he saw my calmness, my refusal to scream or beg, and he began to believe what I had always known: Melissa was a predator wearing the mask of a victim. Escalation also meant my mother's complicity grew stronger. She began to guilt-trip me openly, saying things like, "Clara, you must forgive Melissa. She's sick. She doesn't mean it. You're her sister. It's your job to protect her." And when I stayed silent, my mother's voice hardened into venom. "You're selfish. You only think about yourself. Melissa will always be more important than you." That cut deeper than any shove, deeper than any scratch. But again, I did not scream. I did not beg. I turned my face to stone and whispered to myself the promise I had made long ago: not forever. Each ruined milestone became kindling for the fire I was quietly building. I started small acts of resistance. When Melissa collapsed at a family barbecue, I didn't run to her side. I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sipped it slowly, watching as others scrambled. When she groaned during my birthday dinner, I cut my cake anyway, slowly, deliberately smiling at the slice as if it were the most precious thing in the world. These were tiny rebellions, but powerful because they showed me that her control over me was slipping. And those watching David Aunt Linda began to notice. The escalation had turned me from a victim into a strategist. Each time, Melissa raised the stakes with more dramatic collapses, with more vicious whispers, with more physical aggression. I responded with something quieter, sharper: observation, patience, silence. I was building my arsenal. She thought she was writing my downfall, but I was quietly writing her confession piece by piece, waiting for the day the script would flip. It was during one of Melissa's perfectly timed collapses at a cousin's graduation that I realized her pattern had hardened into something mechanical, almost rehearsed to perfection, and instead of anger, I felt a strange, cold clarity settle over me like a veil being lifted. She sat there at the dinner table, laughing a moment before. Then the next second, she pressed her right hand against her side and moaned in that carefully measured way, just loud enough to draw eyes, but soft enough to appear brave. Mom shot up from her chair, panic etched into every wrinkle of her face. Dad grabbed his keys as if on autopilot, and everyone else fell into their usual roles of concern and pity. And I sat still, my fork poised above my plate, my heart steady, my breathing slow. In that stillness, I saw it clearly, always the right side, always an 8 or 9, always calling Mom first, always collapsing, just as I began to shine. The precision of it sickened me, not because of the cruelty it was too familiar to hurt anymore, but because of the realization that she believed she would never be caught. That arrogance was her weakness, and in that moment, I decided I would not let another milestone be stolen without consequence. I began to observe her with the detachment of a scientist. I carried a notebook in my bag and jotted down every detail: the exact time her symptoms began, the duration of her supposed pain, the order in which she cried for attention, the words she used to describe it. I watched the way her hand always went to the same spot, the way her eyes flicked to see if Mom was watching before she moaned louder. It was like watching an actress hitting her cues on stage, and in my silence, I was collecting evidence. My quietness became sharper than any accusation because while she thought I was sulking, I was building a case. One night, after another ruined celebration where Melissa fainted in the living room just as David announced his job promotion, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed, staring at the wood grain under the dim light. I didn't cry. I didn't rant. I simply took out my phone and whispered into it, recording my thoughts like a diary. This was my first piece of evidence, my own voice calmly stating the pattern, predicting what she would do next. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a beginning, and the act of recording gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. My suspicion turned into resolve. Quietly, I began to enlist allies. Aunt Linda, who had long given me sympathetic glances across the table, agreed to share what she had noticed: how Melissa never suffered when no one was watching, how her pain vanished if the spotlight wasn't hers. David, too, began helping me track. He installed a discreet camera in the hallway during Christmas, and we caught Melissa alone practicing her limp in the mirror before walking back into the living room with tears in her eyes. The footage was grainy, but it was enough to make my heart race. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was evidence. Each discovery fueled me. Each quiet step added another weapon to my arsenal. And through it all, I never confronted her, never shouted, never tipped my hand. I continued playing the role of the silent sister, the one who endured while inside I sharpened my knives. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with a friend, laughing softly as she said, "It always works. Mom panics if I say it's the right side. If Clara's having a good day, that's when it's best. Everyone feels sorry for me and thinks she's heartless." Her words slithered into my ears like poison, but instead of breaking me, they solidified my decision. I quietly hit record. The next day, as Melissa strutted around in new clothes bought with money she claimed was for medication, I followed her silently, snapping photos of the receipts, the shopping bags, the Instagram posts flaunting her purchases. Every lie left a trail, and I was finally willing to follow it. The decision came to me not in a burst of rage, but in the calm after years of storms. I would not just defend myself anymore. I would expose her. Not with screams, not with fights behind closed doors that my mother would dismiss, but in front of everyone the same way she had humiliated me all my life. My revenge would be quiet, calculated, undeniable. And as I watched Melissa rehearse her pain faces in the mirror one evening, I stood in the doorway, unnoticed, my arms crossed, my lips pressed into the faintest smile. She thought she was perfecting her art, but I was already framing the final act. The night of the family dinner arrived like the final act of a play I had been rehearsing in my head for months, and though everyone thought it was just another routine gathering inside me, a storm of calm anticipation brewed because I knew this was the stage on which Melissa's performance would finally collapse under the weight of truth. The long dining room table was set with candles, roast beef, steaming in the center-side dishes passed around with chatter and laughter. And all the while, my hand rested gently on my belly, the secret of my pregnancy still mine to reveal. My mother moved between the kitchen and table, fussing over Melissa as usual, adjusting her chair, making sure she had enough water while I sat silently beside David, his warm presence steadying me. When the plates were full and the wine glasses raised, I tapped mine with the silver fork, the clear chime cutting through conversations, and I stood. Every face turned to me expectant, curious, unaware. My voice came steady, filled with the joy I had been guarding. "I have wonderful news. David and I are expecting a baby." For a breath, the room was stunned, and then the explosion of joy erupted. Applause. Cheers, my grandmother weeping openly. Cousins rushing to embrace me, my father beaming with pride. For a fleeting moment, I was bathed in pure recognition. My life finally centered my child, already celebrated. But across the table, Melissa's smile twitched and vanished. Her fork dropped clinking against her plate like a bell tolling doom. And then she pressed her hand to her side, eyes fluttering shut as she groaned, sliding dramatically from her chair. Gasps filled the room. Mom shrieked her name, rushing to catch her as she crumpled, crying, "Melissa, my baby, hold on." Dad scrambled for his keys. Relatives panicked, and in seconds my announcement was gone, swallowed whole by the spectacle of Melissa's collapse. But this time the script would not end the way she planned. As my mother clutched Melissa's trembling body, wailing, she turned on me with sharp accusation. "Clara, look at what you've done. Your news has shocked her into pain. Can't you see you're killing her?" The cruelty of that accusation, the injustice of it was familiar, but instead of burning it, only hardened me. I stood still calm, letting the room spin in panic around me. My silence cut sharper than any shout. Then, slowly, I reached into my purse and withdrew my phone. "Wait," I said, my voice cold and commanding, slicing through the chaos. "Wait before you run to the hospital again." Everyone froze. My aunts hovered. My cousin's eyes darted between me and Melissa. My father hesitated at the door, keys in hand. Melissa moaned louder, pressing her side, her eyes glistening with fabricated tears. But I saw the flicker, the crack in her mask, the fear that crept in. "There's something you all need to see," I continued. I pressed play on the video I had recorded earlier that day in the upstairs bathroom, my reflection on the screen, my voice crisp as I predicted exactly what would happen. "In 20 minutes, I will announce something joyful. Melissa will drop her fork, press her right side call for mom, rate her pain, an 8 or 9 demand to lie down, and within minutes, she will ask to be taken to the hospital." The room fell silent, the only sound the clock ticking, and Melissa's forced gasps. Eyes widened, murmurs spread. My mother shook her head in disbelief, whispering, "No, no, this isn't right." But Melissa's frozen expression betrayed her. Her hand still clutched the exact spot I described. Her voice trembled as she stammered, "She's lying. She made this up. I really hurt." But before she could spin her story, I tapped again and played the next file. Grainy footage appeared, Melissa alone in a hallway mirror rehearsing expressions, clutching her stomach, frowning, sighing dramatically, then adjusting her face to see which looked most convincing. Gasps rippled through the room. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. Uncle Roberto muttered, "Jesus Christ," under his breath. Still, Melissa tried to deny her voice, high-pitched, panicked. "That's not what it looks like. I was joking, practicing for a play." But my calmness was relentless. Another tap, another piece of evidence. This time, audio, Melissa's voice on the phone with her friend, laughing as she explained, "It always works if I say it's the right side." Mom panics instantly. "If Clara's having a good day, it's perfect. Everyone feels sorry for me and thinks she's heartless." The laughter of her friend echoed cruelly, filling the stunned room. My mother's hand slipped from Melissa's hair, her eyes wide, tears welling, but not of sympathy, of betrayal. My father's face darkened, his knuckles white around the keys. Still, I didn't stop. I played the next recording, screenshots of bank statements, photos of shopping bags. I spoke calmly as the images appeared. "This is the money you all gave her for medication, the expensive treatments she claimed insurance wouldn't cover. Over $3,000 in the last 6 months spent on clothes, makeup, nights out." Gasps again, angry whispers, my grandmother crossing herself in shock. Melissa's tears now were real, streaking down her cheeks, but not of pain, of panic. Her breathing quickened, her act unraveling. She reached out toward me suddenly, her nails clawing, and slapped me across the face. The sound cracked through the room. My cheek burned, but I did not flinch. I simply straightened, eyes steady, phone still in hand. That slap was the last proof I needed, because now the entire family had seen the mask fall. A ripple of shock turned into anger, voices rising. "How could you, Melissa? What have you done?" My father's voice cut through, deep, trembling with rage. "Enough!" His eyes fixed on Melissa, and for the first time in my life he didn't look at her with indulgence, but with fury. "You've humiliated us all," he said, his voice like stone. My mother sobbed, her hands shaking, whispering, "How could I have been so blind?" Melissa screamed, then her voice shrill, desperate, admitting what I had known all along. "Yes, I faked it. I faked it because I had nothing else, because Clara always had everything." The words tumbled out like shards of glass. Her mask shattered her body, shaking not from illness, but from exposure. The room erupted, relatives shouting, some standing, some turning away in disgust. Aunt Linda's voice cut clear, sharp, with disgust. "You've tortured your sister for years, and we all believed you." Melissa fell to the floor again, but this time no one moved to comfort her. She sobbed, trembling, but the hands that once rushed to hold her now stayed at their sides. And I stood there, silent, powerful, the evidence all around me, the truth undeniable. My calmness was louder than her screams. My quiet defiance had become the hammer of justice. And as I looked down at her crumpled form, I whispered, "You wanted the spotlight, Melissa. Now you have it. Every single eye is on you. But it's not pity you've earned, it's disgust." For a moment, the room was a frozen tableau, every relative locked between disbelief and horror, the air heavy with the stench of betrayal that no candle could mask, and then Melissa broke the silence with a scream so raw it pierced through the walls, her voice cracking as she clawed at her hair, shrieking, "You don't understand. You never understood. Do you think it was easy living as Clara's sister? Do you think it was easy watching her be perfect while I was nothing, while I was just the sick baby everyone pitied?" Her words tumbled out in jagged bursts, each syllable drenched with resentment, and the family recoiled as if her confession itself were toxic. My father slammed his fist on the table, the plates rattling, his voice thunderous. "Enough, Melissa! Enough of your lies! Enough of your cruelty! I should have stopped this years ago." My mother staggered back, her hands trembling, tears streaming as she whispered, "My baby, my God, what have you done?" Melissa turned to her, desperate pleading. "Mom, please, you know why I did it. You know? She always had everything. She was smart. She was loved. She had friends. Boys wanted her and me. I had nothing. I only had your attention when I pretended to be sick. It was the only way I mattered." Her sobs were jagged, her face twisted with bitterness, but the room did not move to comfort her. My cousins stared in disgust, my uncles muttered under their breath, and my grandmother crossed herself again, whispering, "Lord, forgive us for believing her." Melissa dropped to her knees, grabbing at my mother's dress, but Mom pulled away as though burned her eyes, hollow, her voice low and broken. "You lied to me. You made me your accomplice. You stole years from all of us. You turned me against Clara. How could you?" Melissa wailed louder, but now the sound rang empty, a hollow echo of the sympathy it once inspired. She lashed out again, her voice sharp, venomous. "You don't get it. Clara destroyed me. Her existence destroyed me. What else was I supposed to do? Just fade away. Just be invisible." I stepped forward, then my movements calm, deliberate, my voice low but steady. "No, Melissa, you destroyed yourself. Every lie, every trick, every collapse, you built this. You weren't invisible. You made yourself a monster." She froze, her chest heaving, her tears blurring her vision, and for the first time her voice faltered a whisper. "I just wanted to matter." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. Aunt Linda's voice broke it sharp as a blade. "You mattered, Melissa, but you chose to matter by destroying others, and that is unforgivable." My father's voice followed steady with fury. "From this day forward, you will not manipulate this family again. You are done." Melissa's eyes widened, panic blooming, as if she had never imagined her power could truly end. She reached for me, desperation seeping into every motion. "Please, Clara, you can't do this. You're my sister." And I looked down at her with the same calm that had carried me through every stolen moment, my hand resting gently on my belly, and I said, "No, Melissa. I was your target, not your sister." The words hit her like a blow, her body collapsing back to the floor, sobs racking her frame, her voice hoarse as she choked out, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." But the words rang hollow, too late, too broken. My mother turned her face away, unable to look at her. My father sat down heavily, his hands covering his face. The family's verdict was unspoken but clear. Melissa was exiled in that moment, not by decree, but by the weight of truth. And as she lay there, crumpled sobbing in a heap of her own making, the spotlight she had always craved burned her instead of glorifying her, revealing every flaw, every deception, every scar of manipulation she had inflicted. The collapse was complete, not of her body, but of her empire of lies, and the silence that followed was the sound of justice finally echoing through the walls of our home. The silence after Melissa's collapse was thick enough to choke on every eye in the room staring at her crumpled body on the floor, and for the first time, no one rushed to lift her. No one scrambled for car keys or water or medicine. They simply stood still, watching her writhe in sobs, and that absence of sympathy was louder than any condemnation. I remained standing calm, my cheek still burning faintly from her slap, my hand resting on my stomach, and I felt the power of stillness surge through me. I spoke quietly, but every word carried weight. "You wanted every moment of mine destroyed, every celebration stolen, every smile turned into chaos, but tonight, you have destroyed yourself, Melissa. You wanted the spotlight, now you have it, and everyone sees you exactly as you are. My father lifted his head, then his eyes bloodshot, his voice trembling but firm. This ends tonight. No more money, no more excuses, no more lies. You will not manipulate this family again. My mother sobbed silently, her face in her hands, and when she finally looked at Melissa, her voice cracked. I believed you for 15 years. I defended you. I turned against Clara because of you, and all the while you were laughing at us. How could you? Melissa crawled toward her on her knees, reaching for her, wailing. Mom, please, I didn't mean to. I was desperate. I needed you to love me. But my mother stepped back, her tears falling freely, shaking her head as though even her grief had been stolen from her. The betrayal had cut too deep. My cousins whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disgust, and Aunt Linda said clearly, You stole not just Clara's moments. You stole our trust. You stole our peace, and you can never give that back. Melissa's sobs filled the room, but no one moved to comfort her. The family had finally shifted, the tide had turned, and the pity that once fed her act had withered into contempt. I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving hers, and I spoke with the calm finality of a judge delivering sentence. You ruined 3 of my relationships. You spent thousands meant for medicine. You gaslit our parents into thinking I was cruel, and tonight you tried to steal even the joy of my child's existence. You've lost, Melissa. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because I waited. Because truth always waits. She sobbed harder, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, I'll change. I swear, just don't leave me. But the words rang like dust, empty, brittle. My father turned away, unable to bear her sight, and my grandmother whispered, You are not the girl we prayed for. You are something else, and my heart aches that we let it grow. The verdict was sealed in their eyes. Melissa had begged for attention all her life, but now she had it in the worst way possible as a criminal in her own home, judged and rejected by the very people she once controlled. I breathed deeply, the air finally feeling light in my lungs, and I knew justice had been delivered, not with violence, not with vengeance, screamed, but with the quiet persistence of truth laid bare. I stood in the wreckage of what used to be my family's unquestioned loyalty to Melissa, and for the first time I felt taller, not because anyone lifted me up, but because I no longer carried the weight of her shadow. The room was quiet, except for her ragged sobs, her body curled in on itself, trembling not from sickness, but from the truth pressing down on her. My mother sat slumped in a chair, tears streaking her cheeks, unable to look at either of us, and my father leaned back with his arms crossed, his face hard with the kind of disappointment that wounds deeper than anger. I let the silence hang because silence had always been my weapon, and when I finally spoke, my voice was calm, even and stronger than it had ever been. I am leaving, I said, and this time no one argued, no one begged me to stay, no one accused me of abandoning my sister. My mother raised her head slowly, her lips trembling. Where will you go? I looked at David, his steady hand already reaching for mine, and I answered, Away from this, away from the lies, away from the manipulation, away from the poison that has lived in these walls for too long. My father nodded slowly, a flicker of pride in his eyes, and whispered, It's time. Melissa tried to rise, her voice desperate. You can't! Clara, you can't walk away. You can't leave me here with nothing. Please, please, you're all I have left. But I didn't look at her. I adjusted my coat, my hand resting protectively on my stomach, and I said, You're right, Melissa. You have nothing because you chose nothing. You could have chosen love. You could have chosen honesty. You could have chosen to share the light instead of stealing it, but you chose lies and cruelty, and now you can live with their consequences. Her cry that followed was raw, but no one moved. No one rushed to hold her. No one shielded her from the pain. The family who once carried her weight now let it crush her. I turned toward them, my gaze steady. You all let this happen. You believed the easiest story. You blamed me because it was simpler than questioning her. You let me suffer while she thrived on your pity. My grandmother wept openly, whispering, We didn't want to see. Aunt Linda placed a hand on my shoulder, her voice firm. But now we do. Clara, now. We see. I nodded, not with triumph, but with finality, because justice was not about their regret. It was about my freedom. I took David's hand and we walked to the door, the sound of Melissa's wails following us like a haunting echo. But with every step, I felt lighter, stronger, freer. At the door, I paused, turning back just once, my eyes locking on Melissa. "You wanted to be me," I said softly, "but you never understood that being me wasn't about attention, it was about character. And that is something you will never have." The words hung in the air like a blade, and then I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night. The air tasted fresh, untainted by her lies, and I felt my baby kick lightly beneath my hand, as if reminding me that this was the future I was choosing, a future unshackled by the chains of a toxic family. David kissed my forehead and whispered, "You're free now." And I was. For years, Melissa had fed on my silence, but tonight, my silence had been the weapon that cut her down. For years, I had endured, but tonight, endurance had turned into justice. And as we walked away, leaving behind the sobs, the tears, the broken trust, I knew I had not just ended a cycle, I had broken it for good. My child would never grow up in a house where love was a currency to be manipulated, where sickness was a weapon, where lies overshadowed truth. My child would know strength not as sacrifice but as dignity, patience not as suffering but as wisdom. That was my promise as I stepped into the darkness, not alone, but carrying a new life, carrying hope. Behind me, Melissa's cries rose one last time, but they no longer pierced me, they no longer mattered. They were the cries of someone finally forced to face herself, and that was her prison, not mine. I closed the car door, took one last breath of the night air, and let the past slip away. Justice had been served. Consequences had been laid bare, and healing had begun.